In other news,
I just realized my microphone isn't on. Wow, it's great to be back, isn't it? Okay, so my mic wasn't on for that entire intro. Hello, we're back. The Blues Rants podcast is back after all this time. It's been since March 12th since we've been able to do an episode because, well, there hasn't been a whole lot to talk about. COVID-19 put a grinding halt to everything, not just sports related, but you're talking supermarkets, you're talking businesses. People have been working from home. People have been going to grocery stores about as infrequently as possible. Uh, Nurses and doctors, I don't even know where to begin with the thanks that we owe you, not just in this country, but around the entire world for working and testing and basically putting your own lives at risk to try and help flatten this curve, so to speak. It's been crazy, unprecedented times, but after all that has been said and done, we finally have some new information about when the NHL plans to return to normal play. There's been a whole lot of rumors, and I've been trying to keep people updated on Twitter, which we are live streaming to you now on Twitter and on YouTube, where there's been ideas for returning to play. The proposed playoff bracket has been up in the air until finally we got confirmation from Gary Bettman today, the commissioner of the NHL. I will probably play the audio for that here shortly, but obviously, as you can see, I got a webcam. You can actually see my face now. Sorry that it's not a good one. Just happened to be a spare one I noticed lying around at work, so I thought I'd try giving it a shot. I am vastly unprepared and very unseasoned after not doing an episode for over 2 months. As you can obviously tell by that lovely intro where I was muted for the whole time. But I completely rushed home from work. I had a late day at work today trying to get this whole setup to work. I recently got a new PC. I built a new PC, so I had to remember to reinstall everything like OBS and Discord and recalibrate all of my settings on OBS to make sure that you guys could hear me and you guys could hear my desktop, that you guys could see me on this lovely little camera that I have here that's probably from 2004. I had to make sure my lovely microphone here is working. Hopefully I'm not peaking audio too much here. But it was a lovely time, and I hope I'm not dropping frames or anything like that either, as I try to check and make sure that everybody can hear me and everybody can see me just fine. But as I said, hockey's finally back, in a sense. I've even got the jersey to plan for it. And sorry if the lighting situation is a little less than ideal. Still trying to get used, still trying to learn how this whole streaming thing works. I feel like such an old man. But for now, this should be pretty good, and we should be set to start playing audio from Gary Bettman today on his announcement on the return to play. Now, as some of you probably noticed on Twitter, it has been confirmed it's going to be 24 teams. The top 8 teams, the top 4 teams in the Western Conference and the Eastern Conference have been locked in, the Blues included. The bottom 8 teams will play with the middle 8 teams, if you will, to basically gain almost that wild card spot, if you will, and gain seeding into the playoffs. It's a little bit on the confusing side, as any of us, I'm sure, could have guessed. It is not without its critics, which there's a lot. But before I get into playing Gary Bettman's little announcement here, and I'll probably do a little stop and go here, just going over some of the individual things as we go along. It's not an ideal situation, obviously. People are up in arms about some of the weaker teams, like the even 500 sellers at the trade deadline Montreal Canadiens now getting into the playoffs, or the lowly Chicago Blackhawks, which I think their win percentage is at like a 530 or something ridiculously low. But I'm sure we'll find out those teams, I don't know, maybe Carey Price or the newly acquired Robin Leonard just suddenly pull something out of the blue. But all the same, it comes down really, in my opinion, to one thing. Do you want hockey or do you not want hockey? Because I personally want hockey. So it's something we're just going to have to live with. Do I still find it valid? Yes. I mean, a lot of people have been drawing comparisons to the 2014 season. A lot of people have been drawing comparisons to the lockout in 04 and 05. Again, we've played the majority of the season. Most teams had roughly around just 13 or less games left to play. And no solution they provide is going to be a good one, as Gary Bettman will later acknowledge. No solution was going to be a good one. Someone was either going to feel cheated, or people are going to think that there's too much being allowed, or that the seeding is all wrong, or that the top 8 teams shouldn't have to play, which he'll get into. But I just wanted to say that right off the top, that if you want hockey, this is what's going to have to happen this year. And I still find that whoever wins the Stanley Cup, hoping it's the Blues, knock on wood for that title defense now, it'll still be valid. That's my opinion. I'm sure you guys have yours. But without further ado, let's get into everybody's favorite sports commissioner and see what the entire plan is to resume play for the playoffs.
Good afternoon. I am delighted to be with you today to announce the National Hockey League's plans for our resumption of play, the format of the 2020 Stanley Cup playoffs, and how we will conduct the 2020 NHL Draft Lottery. Before I get into the details, I want to make clear that the health and safety of our players, coaches, essential support staff, and our communities are paramount. While nothing is without risk, ensuring health and safety has been central to all of our planning so far and will remain so. Let me assure you that the reason we are doing this is because our fans are telling us in overwhelming numbers that they want us to complete the season, if at all possible. And our players and our teams are clear that they want to play and bring the season to its rightful conclusion. Although we are anxious to get back on the ice, we will not do anything until we are assured by medical professionals and the relevant government authorities that it is safe and prudent to do so. I want to thank Executive Director Don Fehr, Special Assistant to the Executive Director Matthew Schneider, and all members of the NHL Players Association particularly players Ron Hainsey, Connor McDavid, Mark Scheifele, John Tavares, and James Van Riemsdyk, who were part of our joint Return to Play committee. It took a great deal of collaborative effort to get where we are today, and their insight, input, wisdom, and passion for our game and its traditions were essential to the process that produced the plan I'll now outline. I also want to thank Deputy Commissioner Bill Daly and league staff and medical personnel who worked tirelessly to craft this plan, and the members of the NHL Board of Governors who once again put aside personal preferences to approve a plan that we believe is fair to all of the teams and our best option under the circumstances. It will enable the best playoffs in all the sports to honor our history and produce a champion worthy of claiming the most treasured trophy in all of sports. Now to our Return to Play plan.
So before before we get into actually what the plan is going to be, he said a lot of the right things. Obviously, he thanked the Little Players Commission, helmed by guys like McDavid and Crosby, as to the proper return of sports and what some of the proper safety measures should be, as well as things like what sort of teams are going to be involved, what's the game plan after the 2020 season concludes. Obviously, he'll get into the draft a little bit later, which we can dive into. But he said a lot of the right things. One big thing is the NHL fans wanted this season to resume, which, like I said, it's do you want hockey or do you not want hockey? So I didn't mind that introduction. Thank the deputy commissioner as well for trying to help out with all of this. So we'll just continue on and see what he says about actually returning to play.
When the given go-ahead from the medical experts and the relevant government authorities is given, 24 of our 31 teams will resume play. The top 12 in each conference as ranked by percentage points from our standings as they stood through the games of March 11th when we paused our season as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic.
So I also initially thought it's not a bad idea. I figured I would have liked to actually see win percentage rather than points percentage, which ironically would not favor the Blues as much considering all of the overtime losses or overtime games that we went and extended into. But I figured either points percentage or win percentage would be the most logical outcome for that. Honestly, I really didn't see. A lot of people thought about truncating the season to 63 games and working from that number, which was the minimum amount of games played every team in the NHL had already played. But then you start taking wins and losses away from other teams. So I think wins or points percentage was obviously the best option. They went with points percentage. I would have liked to see win percentage, but sort of apples and oranges in a way, but we'll continue.
The remaining 7 teams will enter the draft lottery, which I will discuss in detail later. For purposes of nomenclature, record keeping, and NHL awards, the 2019-20 regular season has been deemed to be completed. We will resume play and conduct the 2020 Stanley Cup playoffs in 2 hub cities that will be identified and announced at a later date.
So before I continue on any further, so he said it there, that I don't think anybody was surprised by this, but the 2019-2020 regular season is done, which also means that the Blues should be the conference champions, which I haven't noticed a graphic of that for any of their officials yet, like Twitter or Facebook or anything like that. But if I do remember correctly, looking back on the end of the season, sorry again for the lighting issues as I see that pop up on my screen. Actually, I'd have to go to NHL standings here to try and pull that up. But from what I understand, we should be, yes, we should be the conference champions. Either that or by points percentage. No, Colorado would be the only one that's close. Avalanche were behind by 2 at the time that the season stopped. Blues had 11 games to their 12 remaining to play. So should mean that the St. Louis Blues become the conference champions for 2019-2020. As far as awards go, that'll be interesting to see who comes out on top for that. Obviously, there's already discussion about Hart Trophy winner, Rookie of the Year, the Calder, the Vezina, things of that nature. It'll be interesting to see who comes out on top for all of that. League leader at the time of the cancellation of the regular season, I guess we'll call it, David Pastrnak and Alex Ovechkin leading in goals with 48. Austin Matthews of Toronto with 47. That was a heck of a comeback. Assists, Leon Draisaitl, of course, was an absolute animal all season. 110 points, leads the league by a wide margin, by 13 points. His teammate, Connor McDavid, right behind him with 97. Plus minus, Ryan Graves. We've got, let's see here, game-winning goals. Again, Pastrnak and Leon Draisaitl were leading far and away. Mika Zibanejad, I felt probably the worst for because he was on a hot streak. He had that incredible 5-goal game right at the time of the stoppage of the regular season. Games played for goaltenders. Carey Price was in the lead. Carey Price and Connor Hellebuyck were tagged, I should say, with 58. And Andrei Vasilevsky led the Tampa Bay Lightning with 35. Remember when the Tampa Bay Lightning weren't good? Remember when the Tampa Bay Lightning weren't good at the beginning of the season for about 5 minutes, and then they just lit on fire for the next half of the season? Jordan Binnington finished third in wins with 30, right behind Connor Hellebuyck with 31. We have goals against. We've got saves. Connor Hellebuyck with 1,656. I think Connor Hellebuyck would be a ideal choice for the Vezina Trophy candidacy, even though the standings don't quite reflect that for the Winnipeg Jets. I would seriously give some consideration to Connor Hellebuyck for the Vezina. Either that or Anton Khudobin, who led the league in save percentage at a solid .930. That's pretty insane. He's not, let's see where he is. He's not anywhere else on the win list, at least within the top 10. Goals against average, Anton Khudobin third at 2.22. In second at 2.15 goals against average, Jake Allen. Actual Jake Allen. Jake Allen had a quite an impressive comeback season, if I'll be honest. And we might be able to get into the Alex Pietrangelo situation and what might happen there later. But Jake Allen actually, I thought, had a remarkable comeback season. He, once again, was a road warrior, tying a Mad Max reference there. He probably looked more solid than he has maybe since his debut. Definitely since, some of his golden years back when he was alongside of Brian Elliott, 2016, 2017, those couple of years. But him and Anton Khudobin, obviously Tuukka Rask leading with 2.12. Tuukka Rask going to be another Vezina candidate. He's second in save percentage at .929. Seventh in wins with 26. Simply because Tuukka Rask and Yaroslav Halak were lights out for Boston all year. Not to take anything away from Jordan Binnington and Jake Allen. I thought they were quite the fierce tandem as well. Obviously, Jordan Binnington got the All-Star accommodations. Again, third overall in wins for this regular season. So Binnington might get some Vezina votes. You never know. But I would seriously consider Anton Khudobin, Darcy Kemper, if he had remained healthy. That was a brutal injury he had right there around, I want to say, the midway point of the season, shortly after the All-Star break. Elvis Merzlikins. Who would have thought Elvis Merzlikins? He is fifth in goals against average and in save percentage. Who would have thought this guy, Elvis Merzlikins? He was literally carrying Columbus to a playoff spot, which ironically now they still have. So I've talked enough. Let's go back to the commissioner, lovely Gary Bettman, and hear what the rest he has to say about returning to play. Also, he's mentioning that there's going to be hub cities. We're at 3 minutes 19 if any of you want to follow along or not.
One will be the site for the resuming Eastern Conference clubs. The other will play host to the resuming Western Conference clubs. Each will have secure arenas, practice facilities, hotels, and local transportation for our players, coaches, and essential staff. We expect that our clubs will be permitted to travel a maximum of 50 personnel to their hub city. A very limited number of support staff will be able to access the event level at each venue.
So I wonder what a small number of support staff actually pertains to if we're already limiting them to 50 personnel in one of the suggested hub cities. I also wonder, what exactly denotes support staff based on this, rather vague term. I'm sure the NHL will define that in more detail in the coming week, maybe even the coming days. But sounds like you're talking to about 50 personnel. I'm assuming that's obviously including, your 22 to 25 roster players or non-roster players should anybody get hurt. But beyond that, you'd obviously have coaches, you would have medical personnel, you would have any sort of athletic trainers or staff. I doubt the GMs would have any sort of involvement, any assistant GMs. I figured you just got to watch it from home. But I'm probably guesstimating only roughly 60 people at the very most per team, which not a crazy number, but it's going to be interesting for the NHL to create their own custom private accommodations for all 60 of those people. Can't exactly stick them all in an Airbnb, but let's continue.
A comprehensive system of testing will be in place in each hub city. We are currently in phase 1 of our pause, during which clubs have been instructed to self-isolate as much as possible and have done so. In early June, we expect to be able to enter phase 2, during which clubs can return to their individual practice facilities for voluntary small group on and off ice training. Yesterday, we released a comprehensive protocol that will govern how we will operate in phase 2. Phase 3 of our return to play plan will be the opening of formal training camps. The timing of our entry into phase 3 again will be determined by guidance from medical and civil authorities. While we are anxious to open camps as soon as possible, we don't envision doing so before the first half of July. Finally, when appropriate, we will move to phase 4, in which our participating clubs will report to their respective hub cities and we will resume play. Obviously, we anticipate playing over the summer and into the early fall. At this time, we are not fixing dates because the schedule of our return to play will be determined both by developing circumstances and the needs of our players. For various reasons, we are also not announcing at this time which 2 cities will serve as our hubs. Things are evolving rapidly, and when we decide on locations, we want it to be on the best available information at the time that we need to make that determination. In the meantime,
So, interesting that none of the dates are being announced as of yet, and I understand this is a daily changing situation. This pandemic that we have on our hands, nothing can really be set in stone yet. But he did say early June. That's just next week. That's just around the corner here. So it'll be interesting to see what they determine in the next 7 to 10 days. What's considered safe and what's not. in terms of his plans for phase 1 and then shortly after going into phase 2. But anyways, as he also mentioned, return to training camps and some of their own home facilities and practice facilities July 1st, tentatively. That's already, another month and some change down the road. So we still got a lot of waiting to do. But it'll be interesting to see what occurs in the next week. And again, I'm still not sold on what they're going to find out within the next week that they haven't already found out for the last 2 months, aside from, we've been staying in and flattening the curve. And it's been kind of doing okay because some of us are smart and some of us are going to the Lake of the Ozarks. Sorry, I had to throw that jab in there. But anyway, here are the hub cities that Commissioner Gary Bettman has suggested playing in.
I can say we have narrowed the choices to a number of cities that as of today include Chicago, Columbus, Dallas, Edmonton, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Pittsburgh, Toronto, and Vancouver.
So I really got a kick out of this one, and I know a lot of Twitter and the media did as well. Just to reiterate, you've got Chicago, who I'm sure some of you guys are from the Illinois or St. Louis area and have been hearing the absolute bleep storm of COVID that's been going on just in Chicago. Not really anywhere else in Illinois, but specifically a lot in Chicago and close to the Quad Cities. You've got Columbus. They weren't in a playoff spot beforehand. You've got Dallas, Texas. You've got Edmonton. You've got Las Vegas. You've got LA. You've got the Minneapolis, St. Paul area. You've got Pittsburgh. You've got Toronto. And you've got Vancouver. Again, I understand the need for hub cities to be large in order to house all of these players and try and get them their own private housing and continue to keep any sort of contamination away from the players themselves. But also, you've got a city like Chicago or Columbus. You've got team cities that weren't even close to sniffing the playoffs. Like LA. You're going to have Los Angeles, like a neutral site? Like, are we going to the NFL now? I mean, I guess I'm for it because it's something different, but... And again, this has got to get cut down to 2 cities, as he said. 2 cities. So, essentially, from a St. Louis perspective, from the Blues perspective, who are no longer involved, unfortunately, in the selection of a hub city, I'm assuming you're looking at 4 places. You're looking at Chicago, you're looking at Dallas, you're looking at Edmonton, you're looking at Minneapolis, potentially Las Vegas, just from a standpoint of conferences. Western Conference for 12 teams, Eastern Conference for 12 teams. And then, of course, the other cities, you have Vancouver, Toronto, Pittsburgh, LA, and Columbus. So, I apologize. I can't count. That's 10. That would be why. So you've narrowed it down to 5 places that the Blues could play in. Chicago, Dallas, Edmonton, Las Vegas, or Minneapolis. Again. So it's interesting to see where they go with that. And I think I also saw from Elliot Friedman on Twitter today that they're going to really push that decision within the coming weeks. Sounds like that's going to be one of the next big decisions we probably hear about, aside from the minor details of, phase 1 through 4 and what that will all entail. But, I mean, if I'm any of the teams, if I am Pittsburgh, Toronto, Vancouver, Columbus, Chicago, if I'm Dallas, if I'm Edmonton, if I'm Las Vegas, if I'm Pittsburgh, I'm really happy about this. I'm especially Dallas and Las Vegas, because I believe Dallas and Las Vegas are 2 of the top 4 teams that already have a bye, quote unquote, that don't have to play their way into the already existing bracket that he's going to explain here in a minute. I would really be happy if I were Dallas or Las Vegas, just based on home ice advantage. I know it's probably kind of stupid considering this is going to be empty or very, very limited seating, but still, you're playing at home. I feel like that has to be some form of advantage at some point, regardless of the audience, lack thereof, that will be attending. So, anyways, again, hub cities: Chicago, Columbus, Dallas, Edmonton, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Pittsburgh, Toronto, and Vancouver. So we'll continue on here and see what Gary Bettman has to say next.
There are no shortage of candidates that can help us do this. Again, the final determination will depend on COVID-19 conditions, testing availability, and government regulations.
So by Chicago.
The top 4 teams in each conference will claim automatic berths in the first round of the playoffs. They will play intra-conference round robins, each playing the other 3 teams to determine their respective seeds in the first round. These games will be played with regular season overtime and shootout rules, with ties in the final standings broken by regular season points percentage.
So that one was a lot to unpack, and probably the option that I like the least about this new Stanley Cup playoff revisal. So as he said, it's a round robin for the top 4 teams. Top 4 teams for the Western Conference are, of course, St. Louis, Colorado, Dallas, and I believe Las Vegas. Las Vegas or Edmonton. I'm trying to remember. That being said, they're going to play in a round robin looking for essentially the top 4 seedings. Number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. They will be played, as he said, with regular season overtime and shootout rules, which, yay. I really hope the final game of Colorado St. Louis, just to see who gets number 1, goes to a total coin flip. I really hope for that. I really do hope for that. We're in the playoffs. This is the playoffs. Just go by playoff overtimes. I don't understand the challenge there. I mean, okay, great. You have like a preamble of what'll probably just turn into another series of, like a St. Louis and Dallas or a Colorado and Dallas or something like that. And then they just do it all over again because you're going to squash the absolute cannon fodder that is Montreal and Columbus, and insert another team here that wasn't going to make the playoffs. Chicago, fine. I'll keep picking on Chicago. But I just don't understand why you just wouldn't stick to playoff rules. And again, I think the round robin thing at the beginning was stupid. And not just out of a bias for St. Louis and the fact that they would have just had the number 1 seed. But I mean, they've already gotten this far. We've already expressed our displeasure in some of these top teams having to continue to play, in the first round. And now, even before that, now the Blues have to essentially play what could be an extra 3 games in comparison to anybody that's, not 8 through 24. Essentially, if that's what I'm getting from that, I mean, I just can't quite understand the logic behind that. I really can't understand the logic behind not having simple playoff overtime rules in the beginning of the Stanley Cup playoffs. And I'm really hoping that it's not just St. Louis and Colorado play each other for that first seed, whoever gets that first seed or second or third or fourth, and then they just end up seeing each other again in the playoffs. Like we've already played against Colorado, 4 times? 4? 5? I think we've only played against Chicago 5, but Colorado we've at least played 3 or 4 times. And also, they weren't that good against Colorado. I really like to not play Colorado, but I digress. Continuing on with the NHL's plan.
The remaining 8 teams in each conference will play in best-of-5 qualifying round series to determine which 4 in each conference advance to the first round of the playoffs. The matchups for these series, again, are based on points percentage at the time of the pause. These games will be played with playoff overtime rules.
So the ones with the lower seeding are going to play playoff overtime rules, but the top seeded teams aren't. Again, like I'm just so confused. Like what? Why is it like this? I still can't wrap my head around that. But again, I'll lay off on it for now. As I said, the remaining 8 teams, the bottom 8 teams, play a best of 5 series to punch their ticket into the actual playoffs, the first round of the playoffs. That I'm okay with. I'm okay with the baseball style golden ticket, if you will. It's not the 1-game wild card of actual baseball standings, and it's not the 1-game tournament style of the entire NFL. But I'm okay with a best of 5. Honestly, in terms of time constraints, I would be almost more okay with a best of 3. Honestly, I mean, your guys have had enough time to rest and recover. Plenty of players have just been doing either, their own home workouts. But you just have to think of all these timing issues. At this time, right now, in 1 week's time, we're going to be slowly starting to reopen centers of practice and play areas for the different players. They're going to have who knows exactly how long to all get back together and start playing with each other again and rebuild that chemistry that's been missing for the last 2.5 months. And then pretty much shortly after that, who knows how long, you're going to be jumping right into the postseason. That's going to be a huge shift, and it's going to be a short amount of time. And on top of that, you got to play them for 5 games, 5 games, a best of 5 series. I'm okay with the 5-game series. I'm okay with a 3-game series. I think a 5-game series is frankly like the smartest idea, but I would have loved to see the chaos that a 3-game series would have brought. The amount of desperation from all these lower seeded teams that they got this 1 chance or 3 chances, I suppose, to try and get this magical run into the postseason. Which is also another reason why so many people are opposed to this, because now you have teams like Montreal and the New York Rangers and the Columbus Blue Jackets who had pretty much no basis or no means of getting into the playoffs. They shouldn't be there at all. And who knows? Like I said, maybe Carey Price or Elvis Merzlikis, who I believe might be healthy now, just go on an absolute tear in a heater. Maybe Arizona gets Darcy Kemper back or something like that, and they just create this magical run, an even more condensed magical run than the Blues of last year. And maybe people start to invalidate the Stanley Cup for this season because of that. I don't, still, personally, I don't, but maybe some other people do. Anyway, anywho, let's continue on with the NHL's return to play plan and phase 4.
Once the round robin and qualifying rounds are completed, we will conduct conference-based playoffs in each hub city. The winners of the qualifying round robins will advance to the first round, with each opposing one of the round robin teams. Since we have endeavored to be sensitive to players' preferences, the matchups for the first round series remain to be set, as the return to play committee is still discussing whether to determine them through seeding or via a bracket. In addition, the return to play committee is still discussing the lengths of the first and second round series, and whether the second round matchups will be determined through seeding or via bracket. In any scenario, the conference finals and Stanley Cup final will be best of seven.
So I'm not quite sure why they questioned the length of the first and second round if we haven't questioned it already here in the past. I mean, every round of the Stanley Cup playoffs in the past has been 7 games. I'm okay with limiting it to 5 or 3 or whatever for these little buy-in games, these little buy-in series. I'm fine with that. But I don't understand why you would just leave it as the best of 7 and continue as is. Now, again, it's like I said, energy versus the strength and conditioning versus the chemistry of some of these teams. But at the same time, if you're talking about wanting to preserve the tradition and the legacy of the Stanley Cup, I would think you try and leave the playoffs as much as is as you possibly can. My own personal take on that. Anyways, the qualifying round winners play the top seeds in the first round. Interesting that they still have not determined the seeding for that yet, because I looked at the seeding and I'm still not a fan of that either. And I believe he'll go into more detail on that here, so we'll let him take it away.
The sites of the conference finals and Stanley Cup final remain to be determined, although based on what we know today, we expect those series to be played in one of the 2 hub cities. We believe we can get the qualifying and first 2 rounds of the playoffs completed in little over a month. Here are the 12 teams that will be resuming play in the Eastern Conference and assigned to Hub City 1.
So he's just got it as a still image here, but for City 1, you've got Boston, Tampa Bay, Washington, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Carolina, the New York Islanders, Toronto, Columbus, Florida, the New York Rangers, and Montreal. Montreal literally has a 500 record, and I'm laughing my ass off at that. But anyway, let's see if he continues here.
These are the 12 clubs that will be resuming play in the Western Conference and assigned to Hub City 2.
That is St. Louis, Colorado, Vegas, Dallas, Edmonton, Nashville, Vancouver, Calgary, Winnipeg, Minnesota, Arizona, and Chicago. Chicago with a 5-1-4.
In the Eastern Conference, the top 4 teams by points percentage at the time of the pause who will play round-robin games to determine their playoff seeding are the Boston Bruins, the Tampa Bay Lightning, the Washington Capitals, and the Philadelphia Flyers. The qualifying round series matchups in the Eastern Conference are as follows. Number 5 Pittsburgh Penguins versus number 12 Montreal Canadiens.
That would literally be the best case scenario for Pittsburgh if a guy named Carey Price didn't exist. I mean, literally imagine a 5-game series with Crosby, Malkin, potentially Gensel, who's their goaltenders? Matt Murray, and then you just run into the wall that is Carey Price and the totally like non-NHL roster almost that the Canadiens have, because they sold everything. They sold Marco Scandella. They sold Ilya Kovalchuk. They sold everybody. So it'd be hilarious if Montreal literally advances because of Carey Price and nothing else.
Number 6 Carolina Hurricanes versus number 11 New York Rangers.
That is a really interesting one, because a huge talk around the NHL was this is Henrik Lundqvist's final years, and it looks like they're just going to be wasted on a rebuilding franchise since, 2015, and they've just been struggling ever since, and we're going to have this one of the greatest goaltenders of all time fade into Stanley Cup obscurity. He's a Hall of Famer. Nobody's contesting that. He's already a Hall of Famer. but he had never actually gotten the Stanley Cup. He'd gotten close, but he'd never gotten the Stanley Cup. However, the New York Rangers, at the time of the NHL season pause or cancellation, what have you, were really on the rise. And it was, obviously their huge thing was landing Artemi Panarin, who has been phenomenal for them since puck drop of last year. Mika Zibanejad, as I mentioned earlier, is on a hot streak, 5-goal game. Like, what? But then you've got some youth that's actually doing okay. I mean, Tony DeAngelo is a stud of a defenseman over there in New York. And Capo Caco, second overall pick last year, slowly getting into his own. But honestly, I think he may be doing even better than Jack Hughes. It's kind of difficult to say when you have the New Jersey Devils that were, again, a complete flop this past year. Excuse me. But it'll be a really interesting series. But all in all, I mean, you look at Carolina's defense, and I'm pretty sure Carolina, on the opposite side of the coin, they started to drop fairly heavily. Yeah, they dropped pretty heavily since the All-Star break. From what I can see here, just at a rough glance, it looks like they were only at about 500 maybe. But they also, they suffered a lot of injuries. Dougie Hamilton with the fibula, I'm pretty sure he's done. Brett Pesce, James Reimer, of course, got injured, bringing in the legendary David Ayres. I got a jersey of David Ayres. I literally got a Carolina Hurricanes jersey of David Ayres, and just thinking it never ceases to make me smile. I don't know why my second favorite team is Toronto, because then things like David Ayres happen, and I know why Toronto is my second favorite team, and it's because of Steve Dangle, as I'm sure a lot of people have it now. But oh my goodness, the David Ayres thing is literally one of my favorite things ever. I can't get enough of it. But all the same, Carolina, Ryan Dzingel, Dougie Hamilton, Brett Pesce, James Reimer, Sami Vatanen, they all sound like they were pretty bad injuries. All probably requiring surgery. I think Ryan Dzingel might have actually had returned to play at the time that the season was canceled. But you still have Jake Gardiner. You still have Joel Edmondson, who is doing pretty well over there from the amount that I watched him. Jacob Slavin, Brady Shea, who I'm actually saying was a pretty nice pickup there at the trade deadline for Carolina, as I've mentioned in the past. Trevor Van Riemsdyk. And, of course, you've got Justin Williams and Jordan Staal over on the front end, as well as Andrei Svechnikov, who will probably do a lacrosse goal in the playoffs because it's Andrei Svechnikov, and he can. And you've got Nito Niederreiter and Sebastian Aho. So that'll be a really interesting series to watch, New York and Carolina. Just based on the sheer fact it's like, okay, we have a chance to get the King his cup. Can we please do it this damn year while we have a golden ticket chance?
Number 7, New York Islanders versus number 10, Florida Panthers. And number 8, Toronto Maple Leafs versus number 9, Columbus Blue Jackets.
How incredible would it be if the Boston Bruins weren't Toronto's archenemy for once? How amazing would it be if Toronto gets into the first round and somehow they don't have to play Boston? I believe that was the way it was shaping up right up to the start of the playoffs. And how much funnier would it be, you know where I'm going with this, if Columbus pull the Columbus again with actually a team that might actually be healthy to start, because the Columbus Blue Jackets were getting hot despite all their injuries. Let me just recap here for you. Josh Anderson, Cam Atkinson, Oliver Bjorkstrand, Brandon Dubinsky, Nathan Gerbe, Seth Jones, Dean Kukin, and Alexander Texier. I'm pretty sure it was Toronto, Columbus, and Pittsburgh were all in the running for most what's the word I can't think of. They had suffered the most detriment from their amount of players, and Columbus was ridiculously injured. Now Josh Anderson, think he's out. Oliver Bjorkstrand might come back. Brandon Dubinsky, it says a wrist injury. I'm wondering if he had surgery on it. I haven't checked in on that. Nathan Gerbe would probably be back. Seth Jones, I think you might get him back because it was going to be close. I think he was going to be ready for the playoffs if they had gotten in. Dean Kukan with a knee injury, that's probably done. Meniscus tear, he's probably done. Alexander Texier, lumbar stress fracture, not looking hot for him. But could you imagine after they offloaded everything again, they somehow managed to find a way to beat Toronto because it's Toronto? I'm sorry to any Maple Leafs fans listening. There probably aren't any. But if Toronto does get in and they don't have to play Boston, oh dude, I'm all in on Toronto then. I'm all in on Toronto until they get to the Cup final, and then I want it to be St. Louis. How amazing would that be? But so that should be the qualifying rounds for the Eastern Conference. Again, that's Pittsburgh facing Montreal, Carolina facing the New York Rangers, the New York Islanders facing the Florida Panthers, and the Toronto Maple Leafs facing the Columbus Blue Jackets. Whatever one of the four teams I am, I want New York or Florida. I want the winner of the Islanders versus Florida, because that has got to be the worst matchup. Like New York, okay, then the Rangers, maybe, okay, I see a little bit of panic. Columbus really kind of fell off towards the end, but they were still trying to struggle for a playoff spot. Montreal, get out of my sight. Win that series in 3. But I want the New York Islanders and Florida series, because that just seems kind of like a banking, regardless of who wins or loses that one. But anyways, on to the Western Conference, best of 5 qualifying rounds.
In the Western Conference, the top 4 teams by points percentage at the time of the pause, who will play round-robin games to determine their playoff seeding, are the St. Louis Blues, the Colorado Avalanche, the Vegas Golden Knights, and the Dallas Stars.
So I did have that right.
The qualifying round series matchups in the Western Conference are as follows. Number 5 Edmonton Oilers versus number 12 Chicago Blackhawks.
Please wipe the floor with Chicago. I'm not even saying that because I'm a Blues fan. If you actually lose to the lowly Chicago Blackhawks with Connor actual McDavid and Leon actual Draisaitl, that franchise will never forgive you. Oilers fans know the pain of losing superstars. Anyways, moving on.
Number 6 Nashville Predators versus number 11 Arizona Coyotes.
If Darcy Kemper returns, I would love to see Arizona get in. I don't want to see Nashville in to begin with. I think Nashville is kind of St. Louis's new Chicago in a sense. But that one's another kind of a boring series too. I mean, the Coyotes lost Darcy Kemper and they fell off a cliff practically. I mean, Darcy Kemper was literally gluing the glue that kept that team together, it seemed like. And Nashville, Pecorine got a goal. That was cool. So anyways, that would be another interesting series to look at in terms of who gets to play them.
Number 7 Vancouver Canucks versus number 10 Minnesota Wild. And number 8 Calgary Flames versus number 9 Winnipeg Jets.
That is probably the series that worries me the most. And it's a shame. It's such a crying shame that we're not going to get Edmonton and Calgary in the playoffs. It's a long shot. It can still happen, but it breaks my heart because essentially you'd have to have Edmonton and Calgary. You'd have to have Edmonton beat, I believe, the number 1 seed. I believe they would play the 1 seed of the Western Conference, and Calgary would have to play the number 4 seed of the Western Conference. Any of the teams, St. Louis, Las Vegas, Dallas, or Colorado, would be very, very difficult competition for both of those teams. But that is the only way we could see Edmonton and Calgary in the playoffs. And it would be a conference final. Which I'm almost like, now I'm like rooting for that. Now that I'm thinking of that, like, I'm obviously still rooting for St. Louis, but I'm kind of rooting for an Edmonton-Calgary conference final in front of no fans. I mean, that'd be so ridiculous, man. How amazing would that be? Anyways, moving on.
Now to the 2020 NHL Draft Lottery. This is a bit complicated, as if what I've already told you hasn't been.
Yes, that's for sure. So before we get into the specifics of the draft, again, it's not perfect. I'm still not crazy about the seeding of either the buy-in round, if you will. I'm not crazy about the round robin and how that will determine seeding, like it's the World Juniors or something like that. But again, it's the best they could come up with. They obviously had some of the top tier players like Crosby and McDavid on a council, which they are still on to try and determine what would be the best possible option. But it definitely raises some eyebrows. It raises some questions and concerns. But at the end of the day, it's hockey. We get hockey back. And it'll be a wild, wild experience to not have fans in an NHL arena. I'm sure, especially for the players. But we'll just have to see. We'll have to see what comes up next. Also, I think I saw an article that they might be putting artificial sound into the NHL arenas to simulate audience noise, which would be hilarious. I don't know how they do that. I don't know if that would actually work, but that'd be hilarious to watch. You get Connor McDavid scoring on the Blackhawks, and you just hear a talk box just go nuts, like it's literally NHL 20, like it's a video game. So that wraps it up for the tournament bracket, I guess, if you will. As for the 7 teams that are not getting into the playoffs, that includes the Detroit Red Wings, the Ottawa Senators, the Buffalo Sabres, the New Jersey Devils, the San Jose Sharks, the LA Kings, and the Anaheim Ducks. All 3, the California teams. Isn't it funny how LA's up for a host site, but all 3 of the California teams were utter garbage? Doesn't that just seem weird to you? I hope that LA doesn't get picked as a host city. I really don't. There's no reason for that. But, yeah. I'm sure in some way that the Detroit Red Wings will manage to spin getting the first overall pick. It'll be very interesting to see how the playoff percentages go for the rest of these teams. But let's just quickly segue into the draft, which sure not a lot of Blues fans care a whole lot about, but it still matters a decent amount.
And I apologize for that. The draft lottery will determine which clubs make the first 3 selections in the 2020 NHL draft, and it will be conducted in 1 or 2 phases, depending upon the results of the various draws. The 7 clubs that did not resume play and the 8 qualifying round clubs that do not advance into the playoffs will enter the draft lottery. At the time of the first phase draws, we won't know which 8 teams won't advance from the qualifying round. So we have designated temporary placeholders with the odds that the collective group would have had. Phase 1 draws will be conducted on June 26th, prior to the round robins and qualifying round. There will be 3 separate draws to determine which clubs possess the first, second, and third overall selections, in the 2020 NHL Draft. Each will include the 7 non-resuming clubs and 8 placeholder teams that have not yet won a draw. If any draw is won by one of the 7 non-resuming teams, that club or the club to which that first round pick was traded gets that selection. If all 3 draws are won by non-resuming clubs, there will be no need for a phase 2. Should any of the 3 draws not be won by a non-resuming club, we will conduct a phase 2 before the conference quarterfinals. At that point, the assignment of the remaining top 3 selections will be determined through draws, including only the qualifying round clubs that failed to advance. For any and all phase 2 draws, all teams involved will have the same odds of winning. Once the top 3 selections are determined, all remaining clubs will be slotted in reverse order of their 2019-20 points percentage.
So that's a lot to unpack. So essentially, their phase 1 is for the 7 teams that have not made the playoffs at all. Your Detroit, your Ottawa, your Boston, etc., etc. The bottom 8 teams that are getting into the playoffs also have a chance. They also have a chance to draw the first overall pick. You could be, I have to do math here for a second. You could be 15th. 15th of 31 in the standings. And you could get the first overall pick. Now, if I'm understanding this correctly, Bettman did say that, and I might have to rewind here a little bit, that the 8 teams that are resuming play, the 8 teams that are vying for a playoff spot to get eliminated, obviously we don't know who, they'll all have an equal percentage shot at the pick. Doesn't matter what order they're eliminated in, doesn't matter their points percentage or anything like that. They all have an equal percentage chance, obviously lower than that of the bottom 7, to receive the first overall pick. So let me just rewind this here and let's just listen to that again, because I'm still trying to process this as well. I've only been able to listen to this once or twice before we recorded.
Clubs that failed to advance. For any and all phase 2 draws, all teams involved will have the same odds of winning. Once the top 3 selections are determined, all remaining clubs will be slotted in reverse order of their 2019-20 points percentage.
So that's interesting. So once the top three picks, remaining clubs will be slotted in reverse order of 2019-20 points percentage. Imagine if you're Montreal and you've sold off all your assets. You've given off everything. You held on to Max Domi. As much as you'd love to get Carey Price into the playoffs again, probably going to be a long shot to get a Stanley Cup with him. Just carrying an entire franchise on his back. Could you imagine if you intentionally tank in the first round? Already you have a chance at Alexis Lafreniere. Alexis Lafreniere, the homeboy, Alexis Lafreniere, who's going to go number 1 overall. I mean, we all know this. Will he be, the next Connor McDavid? I don't know. I'm hoping he's better than Jack Hughes, though. Sounds like he might be even greater than Jack Hughes. We'll see. But if I'm Montreal, am I not wanting to consider just completely tanking for a better percentage at that draft pick? Or at least getting number 4. Slotted in the reverse order of 2019-2020 points percentage. So regardless of that, I still already have a pretty solid shot at getting 4. if I'm Montreal, I don't know what I'm playing for. I really don't. Do I play spoiler to Chicago and then play spoiler to Colorado, Dallas, Las Vegas, St. Louis, these wagons of teams with Carey Price and Brendan Gallagher? I got to think that Montreal is going to do whatever they can to swing this in their favor. As nice as it would be to get Carey Price in the playoffs one more time, because unfortunately I think we're coming to the end of his twilight years. As an organization, like, I don't see it. As an organization, I would say I want Alexis Lafreniere. Even if it's a microscopic chance, I want Alexis gosh damn Lafreniere. Apologies for my censorship. But specifically with Montreal, it's interesting because they have the worst points percentage of anybody that's in the playoffs right now. They were at an even 500. Chicago's right down there with them at 514. But just specifically for a couple of these teams, it's really interesting whether you actually choose to want to play or not, or if you want to get a chance at that first overall pick. Which again, it's probably pretty heavily stacked in the bottom 7 teams' favors.
Let me give you some explanation. The format was adopted in order to maintain the distribution of lottery winning odds that were in place entering the 2019-20 season. In other words, teams that do not resume play have the same odds of claiming one of the top 3 selections as they would have had if the 2019-20 schedule had been completed. You can see those odds here.
So, just to show you guys, because I'm not sharing my screen just yet. Detroit is at the top with 18.5%. Ottawa, gosh, the freaking Senators, who'd have thought, have the second and the third percentages at 13.5% and 11.5%. Ottawa, that's ridiculous. I know it doesn't make any sense, but Ottawa could have a combined 25%. I know that's not how it works. That's not at all how it works. But Ottawa has a 13.5 and an 11.5% chance of taking the first overall pick.
As previously stated,
before he continues, Los Angeles, 9.5%, Anaheim, 8.5%, New Jersey, 7.5%, good old Buffalo, we don't know what we're doing, Sabres, at 6.5%. Literally almost a third of the percentage chance that Detroit has.
All clubs involved in any Phase 2 draw as a group will have the same odds of winning. For a possible first of such draws, each club would have 12.5% chance of winning, 1 in 8, which means each of the losing clubs in the qualifying round would have, in effect, a 3% chance of winning the first overall pick.
So, 3% chance. So, the way it's structured right now is for Phase 1. That's considering before any of the teams that are making the playoffs gets one of the top 3 picks. You've got the first team at 6%, then 5%, then 3.5%, then 3%, then 2.5%, then 2%, then 1.5%, then 1%. So team number 15 in the standings still has a 1 in 100 shot of getting Alexis Lafreniere, which is really funny. Now, should that not go through, then it becomes, of the qualifying rounds failing to advance, they all have a 12.5%
chance of winning, 1 in 8, which means each of the losing clubs in the qualifying round would have, in effect, a 3% chance of winning the first overall pick. Obviously, these are extraordinary and unprecedented times. Any plan for the resumption of play, by definition, cannot be perfect. And I am certain that depending on which team you root for, you can find some element of this package that you might prefer to be done differently. But we believe we have constructed an overall plan that includes all teams that, as a practical matter, might have had a chance of qualifying for the playoffs when the season was paused. And this plan will produce a worthy Stanley Cup champion who will have run the postseason gauntlet that is unique to the NHL. Let me reiterate, while we are hopeful, it is our goal that we will be able to resume play and award the Stanley Cup. We intend to do so within a time frame that will enable us to get back to a full calendar for the 2021 season. At the same time, we remain focused on the safety of our players, coaches, support staff, and arena personnel. We will not set dates, choose sites, or begin to play until we know it is appropriate and prudent and are approved to do so. As we seek some return to normalcy, this is an important day, particularly for NHL fans. Since March 12th, we have been hopeful and optimistic that by developing all options and alternatives, we could get to this point. I know I join sports fans everywhere when we say we cannot wait for our players to hit the ice again. And I look forward to the greatest privilege of all, presenting the most storied and coveted trophy in all of sports to the
Okay, so yada yada yada, you get the big picture. So that was Commissioner Gary Bettman on his plan to bring the NHL season back, or at least the NHL playoffs. So just to quickly recap for anybody that's been joining us, the regular season is done with. Regular season's over. They're considering it complete. They are seeding teams by points percentage. So that makes the St. Louis Blues the conference champions, as well as the Boston Bruins, the West Eastern Conference champions. Top 4 teams of each conference get their own playoff seeding locked in. That would be St. Louis, Colorado, Dallas, and Las Vegas on the West. Boston, Tampa, Washington, and Philadelphia. Wow, Philadelphia. On the Eastern side, the rest of the teams play a tournament bracket style buy-in round, if you will. The other 16 teams, they are going to be best of 5. The continuing rounds, the first, second, and conference final, or the first and second round, they've yet to decide if it's going to be a best of 5 or a best of 7, but the conference final and the Stanley Cup final will be 7 games. That's already confirmed. Playoff bracket is Pittsburgh Penguins would play the Montreal Canadiens, Carolina Hurricanes would play the New York Rangers, the Florida Panthers would play the New York Islanders, the Columbus Blue Jackets would play the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Winnipeg Jets would play the Calgary Flames, the Vancouver Canucks would play the Minnesota Wild, the Nashville Predators would play the Arizona Coyotes, and the Chicago Blackhawks would play the Edmonton Oilers. I can't believe I got that right on the first go. The Bruins, Lightning, Capitals, Flyers, and Blues, Avalanche, Stars, and Knights will all play a round-robin style of mini tournament, I guess, to determine the number 1, 2, 3, and 4 seeding, which those teams will then continue to play whoever comes out of the tournament brackets that I just listed. Again, there are problems with it. Again, it's hopefully a once-in-a-lifetime event that has come upon us with COVID-19. Nothing's going to be perfect, but main takeaways is the playoff bracketing and that the regular season is done. And your St. Louis Blues are conference champions. So that's pretty cool. So now the first step to the title defense has been completed. The Blues are guaranteed in the playoffs. Uh, Also, he talked about the drafting odds. Ottawa coming in strong with a 13.5% and an 11.5%. I'm actually reading a quote here from Eugene Melnick on the NHL's announcement. Eugene Melnick, owner of the Ottawa Senators. Today's announcement by the NHL provides the Ottawa Senators with clarity and allows us to set our sights firmly on the NHL entry draft, one that we believe will be the most transformational in our club's history. We are well positioned to select some of the most exciting young players in what is widely perceived one of the deepest drafts in years. For hockey fans, the Ottawa Senators are pleased the NHL has a firm plan for the return of hockey and that the Stanley Cup may be raised this year. A lot of work has gone on behind the scenes to make this happen, and I want to thank everyone who has worked tirelessly to ensure our great name can continue in these unprecedented times. So somebody's happy. Somebody's happy they're going to get Alexi Lafreniere, but who knows, maybe they just draft 4 and 5, which is I still wouldn't complain about that because he is right. This sounds like it's going to be a pretty stud level draft this year. Again, NHL training camps will not open before July 1st. That's pretty much the one date that was set in concrete amongst all of this. Still not a decision if the matchups will be determined by bracketing or reseeding of any form. That's some of the major items right there. Elliot Friedman tweets 2 exhibition games per team, 28 skaters, and as many goalies as you wish to carry. So 28 skaters, allowable of 50 on your staff, and a very, very limited amount of support staff, as Gary Bettman had said. So it's a glimmer of hope. We get hockey again, which is lovely. You know, I enjoy my racing and all. I do. I really do. But NASCAR continues to remind me that I just can't watch it all. I still get reminded that NASCAR is a little bit boring. So, but we do get some hockey back. We'll just have to keep checking on updates as we've gotten today and see where the NHL goes from here. On the Blues side, you know, it's not too drastic of a change, I'd say, for St. Louis. The way that things were going, you know, they were still first in the conference. They were first in the division, obviously. I think the only thing really that's been determined for the Blues is the form of playoff seeding and how that seeding is going to come about now that you have a round robin style of mini tournament with Colorado, Dallas, and Las Vegas. As far as the neutral zone is considered, the not neutral location, but the hub city, the host city, as I should clarify, it wasn't going to be St. Louis. There's not going to be fans, but I still feel like if I'm Dallas, I'm loving this. If I'm Dallas, I am loving this. And I guess I haven't really checked a map of America to see where some of the hot spots are for COVID. Obviously, New York was a really massive one. The Chicago area, which I gotta think Chicago gets scrapped immediately, just because of the COVID hotspot. Edmonton was another one. LA, which why? None of the Californian teams were even close to playoffs. I hope it's not LA. You had Vancouver, you had Minnesota, which both of them play each other in the first round. How about that? That would be interesting. Some of the other ones, Pittsburgh, Toronto, I already mentioned. Edmonton, Chicago, Minnesota, LA. There's a couple I'm missing in there, but you get the picture. But again, for as far as St. Louis goes, don't think that's going to matter. I think the main thing will just be what it's like to play hockey without fans. Isn't it Brett Hull that said without fans there is no game? I've always thought of that, but what can you do right now? You cannot have fans in buildings right now. That's just how it works. I mean, plain and simple. NASCAR, you can get away with it because they're in, 800, 700 horsepower engines. I'm probably way wrong on that. Dirt racing, you're in even larger horsepower engines. Not all that huge of a concern in my eyes. But it'll still be very interesting to see how the NHL progresses without fans for this foreseeable future and how their timelines progress. Because as I said off the top at the very beginning, this is going to be something they're going to have to go through really quickly. If you want to have 5-game and then 4 7-game series progress normally throughout the NHL with 24 teams this time and still be able to get in the draft and be able to get in the NHL regular season whenever that starts for 2020, 2021. That's a lot of 20s in there. I mean, they're talking starting. I heard rumors they're talking starting the regular season next year in January. I mean, this is ridiculously condensed. So whatever they're going to have to do, they've been up against the clock. We've had a month, 2 months plus to isolate, obviously, to quarantine, whatever you want to call it, to stay in and don't do anything except for go for groceries and stuff like that. It's, again, not a perfect solution, but it's a solution, and I want hockey. So, of course, as he said off the top, which is the right thing to say, the safety of players, staff, personnel is paramount, and that's going to be the biggest flux in everything from this moment forward, for the playoffs, for the draft, for the continuing season. So who knows? It'll be interesting. I say it'll be interesting too much. But as far as St. Louis goes, because we haven't had an episode in a while, we're now going on 8:22. It's been over an hour of me just listening and talking. As far as St. Louis goes, obviously the main discussion has been, our captain, Alex Pietrangelo, and of course the salary cap. He's literally one of the top free agents. Cap Friendly has Dustin Byfuglien listed first, but I would say Alex Pietrangelo is probably going to be the hot commodity next year. As it stands right now, the Blues' remaining cap space is $20,000 for this year. Now, we had some signings, and I meant to do an article / podcast or both for those signings. But to be frank with you, I lost track of time, or I was busy with work, or sometimes it was the opposite. I was just lazy. And I apologize for that, because Blues Rants as a whole has not put out a whole lot of content for you guys. And that's something that personally I have to work on a lot more, which is why I'm starting with this revival podcast, if you will. But we had 3 major signings over the course of the postponed season. They all came within coinciding days, hilariously. They all came within 72 hours of each other. The first one was Marco Scandella. Was it the first one, Marco Scandella? We had Mackenzie McEachern, Marco Scandella, and Sammy Blais. Sammy Blais, 2-year average of $1.5 million a year, $3 million contract. Mackenzie McEachern, 2-year, I want to say 2-way contract valued at $900K AAV. And you had Marco Scandella, the big one, $3.275 per year, all the way into the 2023-2024 season. Now, of course, you don't have a lot of UFAs besides Alex Pietrangelo. You have Troy Brouwer, who's already practically a non-roster player as is. You have Jacob Delarose, who will be an RFA next season. You have Vince Dunn, who will be an RFA next season. Jay Bouwmeester was scheduled to be a UFA. You got to think he's all said and done. What an unfortunate way for your NHL career to possibly end, especially the way that Jay Bouwmeester is. You have a cardiac episode that basically sidelines you for the year, and it's a year that's condensed and some people don't even find valid. That's a real bummer for Jay Bouwmeester, but he at least got his one cup last year. You've got Jake Allen and Jordan Binnington still on contracts. Justin Falk is on one of the biggest contracts, as is Braden Shen, who signed a nice little extension at the start of this season. But that being said, their projected cap right now, their projected cap space, $4.5 million. And I'm surprised they're projecting the cap to be $84 million next year. I can't imagine the cap goes up. I got to imagine it stays at 81.5, maybe even goes down. I can't imagine that the cap actually goes up next year to 84. So essentially what you're actually looking at is roughly just over about like $1 million, if that. What does that mean for re-signing Alex Pietrangelo? Well, that means a couple of buyouts could be on the way. You could start with Alex Steen, whose cap hit is at 575 until 2021. You have Jaden Schwartz, who's at 535. You've got Tyler Bozak, who's at an even $5 million for the next couple of years. You've got Jake Allen, who's at 4.35 until 2021. You've got, let's see here, Robert Bortuzzo, who's at 1.375. Not a whole lot of cash. Ivan Barbashev, 1.475. Zach Sanford. I mean, now at this point, like, you're penny pinching. Obviously, the big guys that could get moved somehow are Alex Steen and Jaden Schwartz, maybe Jake Allen. Jake Allen, no clauses in his contract of any kind. He'd probably be the easiest to cut off. Tyler Bozak, modified no trade list. He's got a no team, no trade list. Jaden Schwartz, 15 no trade list. Alex Steen, just a total no trade clause of any kind. I hate to say this because I've always loved Jaden Schwartz. He's been a Blue ever since he was drafted. 27 years old. He showed up in the playoffs last year, and I would love to see him do that again. Like Logan Couture and Jaden Schwartz, for guys that just turned it another gear. I've always thought the same of that of Charlie Coyle, who's over in Boston right now. He's such a beast in the playoffs, and not exactly the regular season. And not so much to the fault of Jaden Schwartz. I think ever since that injury that happened to him last year or a couple of years ago, he just hasn't quite been the same. He had that riotous start to the season back in, when was the year that we didn't make it? The 2017-18 season. He started phenomenally that year. And, I think injuries just kind of sidelined him. Now, he's still young. He's 27. This would still be considered the prime of his hockey career. But do you want Jaden Schwartz or do you want Alex Pietrangelo? That's been the most confusing part about the Blues organization. I was starting to really think that if you're going to sign a guy like Marco Scandella and you're going to have Justin Falk on this ludicrous $6.5 million contract all the way to 2026 and beyond, then I'm really not seeing some of the logic. Unless the Blues know something that we don't as an organization, which maybe they do, and athletic writer Jeremy Rutherford has alluded to that, I think, a little bit. He might have hinted at that in some of his previous articles. But for me, if you want Alex Pietrangelo, there's going to be cuts. Like, this is it. And yeah, again, as an NHL franchise, this is what you want to be. You want to be successful, which also requires you usually being up against the cap. It's what happens. We have that kind of interesting trade with Robbie Fabry, although Robbie Fabry wasn't going to get the minutes under Craig Berube, whatever. But now the time comes where you either have to figure out something with Alex Steen, who's going to be the worst one to negotiate because of his no trade clause. He's 36. He's 5'7", He was getting nothing more than third line minutes this past season. You got Jaden Schwartz, 15 no trade clause. Tyler Bozak, modified no trade clause, 10-team list. He's at $5 million. He's at 34. I got to think that Tyler Bozak goes first. Like, I love you, Bozy. We all loved the I wanted a Stanley Cup so damn bad quip. We all loved that. And you did your part and you got us the cup, and we'll love you for it. But you're 34, you're at $5 million. You were putting up maybe some second line minutes at best. I got to think his $5 million goes out the door first. Because then, in addition to that, you've also got Vince Dunn, who's at the end of his ELC this year. And if you pass on Alex Pietrangelo and you don't get something settled with Vince Dunn, I think you're making a serious mistake. This is a rock solid defensive core. And I know Justin Falk has not lived up to the height. He definitely hasn't lived up to his contract numbers, even now at 415 for this season. But you've still got Colton Parayko. You've got Marco Scandella, who I think will be a good fit. Like, that 3.275, that's actually a good contract. I think that's a decent bridge deal for a guy that's now 30, who literally was traded. We kind of screwed up that trade, in my opinion, to Montreal. But you still got him for reasonably cheap, and he fit right into the roster immediately, seamlessly. Did anyone have a problem with Marco Scandella coming into the team once he got onto the ice and got minutes in? I know we had problems with Justin Falk. We still do. Marco Scandella, on the other hand, I'm fine with that signing. If not for the fact that our 30-year-old captain of this team, who's brought the first ever franchise freaking Stanley Cup to St. Louis, has yet to re-sign a contract. And again, the number is not there for, agent versus, I almost said Jeremy Rutherford, our general manager, Doug Armstrong. I'm still thinking, probably 8.5 to as much as 9. I certainly think he deserves at least 8.5. But now we're talking about having to let go of Tyler Bozak, having to let go of Jaden Schwartz. I don't know. Maybe I'm trying to think of where Jaden Schwartz would be a good fit, like who would want him and what we could get for him. And unfortunately, I don't have quite everything here in front of me. I have Cap Friendly here in front of me, but I'm still not. It's been a while, man. It's been 2.5 months, man. I've done almost nothing hockey related, unfortunately, other than just miss it terribly. And I enjoy talking about hockey again. And I hope you guys have enjoyed listening to me rant about hockey again. But this is probably going to have to be it for me. This has been a 90-minute episode. This has got to be the longest podcast we've done by far. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. I hope you guys like the webcam. Hello. Hopefully I'll be able to get an upgrade on either the webcam or some of my personal space. Sorry that the lighting situation isn't optimal here right now, as kind of had to scramble to get my things back together. I will probably put a bit of a summated article on bluesrants.com for anybody interested, recapping what Gary Bettman said in today's address about returning to play for the NHL. And we'll just keep a close eye out and see. Pay attention to Twitter and or Facebook and or YouTube to see what updates come as they will for return to play, in terms of seeding, in terms of games that the Blues will eventually return to. Your Western Conference champions, St. Louis Blues. And let's get the title defense rolling, man. that's probably going to be it for me as far as everything goes. So thank you all very much for listening. I've been talking for way too long now. Hockey is back. Thank you all very much for listening. We will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.